I can't start until after the bells. You see? And now I can start. Now I can start. It's lovely to see people here, and there's more people joining us. Oh, hello, Ella. Hello, Ella.
Nice to see. Nice to see you. Yeah.
Hi. Good to see you. Oh, it is what a nice guest list. Helen, you'll be on soon, as you know, but I'll do a little introduction on behalf of all of us now. I will, once we get started, I will mute people so there's less other than the speaker and myself, so that we can we don't have too much echo and so on. But let me find my, with any luck, my PowerPoint show, and I can share that. So can people see a blank but a green slide now? Someone can. That's good. So welcome to the fourth in our seminar series. The ISRS, the International Society for Research on Solitude, has a seminar series roughly every 2 months. We have a seminar online on related to anything to do with solitude studies. I'm delighted to be back with you today for the latest one. I'll say something about us and about the society, and then I'll introduce Helen Lees, who is going to be talking about Lonely as a Crowd, Solitude in Schools and the Inner Family. My name is Julian Stern. I work at Bishop Grosseteste University in Lincoln in the UK, and I'm president of the International Society, the ISRS. And with us today, and with us in the society, Małgosia Walejko and Rafa Iwański, the respectively Vice President, the President of Vice, and the Secretary of the ISRS. So we're the people who are behind the scenes putting things together, and it's lovely to have Helen with us to talk today. Just to mention something else about the ISRS, we have a website. The address for the website is on your screen now, and on the website this seminar and the other seminars have been recorded. If you don't wish to be recorded, you can of course switch off your camera and your sound but still listen. But the recordings of the seminars are available on the website, and you'll see the recordings of Richard Cleveland's and Malka Margolitz and Mandy Fulford's. All of them are up there, but as well as that, on the Society's website, you can join. It is free to join. There is a piece of paper you have to fill in so we have permission to email you and so on. There is a link to the conference, which I'll talk about in a minute, a link to the seminars, publications, both general solitude publications and publications by members of the group, and ways of contacting us. So it's got we've got a Facebook page, and we post on that, and there's information about that there as well. The next big event of the ISRS is the next conference, which we'll be mailing people a lot about. Sorry, we will be mailing more information about. I don't mean we'll mail you a lot about the next Alone Together conference. This is the third of the Alone Together conferences. The first was in York a couple of years ago. The second was online, but based in Poland last year. The next one, the third one, is a real one. It's really going to be in Szczecin. Fingers crossed. It's really going to be happening in Poland. But you will also be able to attend online if you can't attend in Poland. So it will be a hybrid conference, but it will be a real conference, thank goodness. we hope, will be able to do those again. So everyone here is welcome, of course, to that conference. As I say, the third of the series, and we put them now under the banner of the International Society for Research on Solitude. There's been lots else happening, and Helen has written a chapter in this book, the Bloomsbury Handbook of Solitude, Silence and Loneliness, which is due out as a e-book next month in November, and as a hardback book in either November or December. A lovely book to have worked on, and there's 35 authors, a whole range of disciplines represented on solitude, silence and loneliness, and looking forward to seeing that. As I say, Helen Lees has a chapter on that and on schooling. She's going to be talking to us today about with the title Lonely as a Crowd, Solitude in Schools and the Inner Family, with reference to internal family systems. There Helen is, but you would have seen her also on the screen. I hope. I've been working with Helen for more than a decade now, and I can't quite believe that, Helen, but for more than a decade now we've been working on various projects and working together. Helen is a specialist on silence in schooling. She's a specialist in home-based schooling. She's a specialist in alternative education, whether that's based in schools or other organisations or in homes. Edited with Nell Noddings, the Palgrave International Handbook on alternative education, and has written monographs herself on both silence and on home-based education. She is an independent researcher, and of course all researchers like to think they're independent. Helen really is an independent researcher based in Italy, and working on how to live peacefully in families and outside. And I hope she is living peacefully as well. It's lovely to have you with us, Helen. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I will stop sharing my screen now, and you in turn will be able to share yours. So if other people can mute themselves so that there's less chance of echo, I will stay unmuted, but I promise, Helen, I'll shut up. But just in case anything happens that I need to ask you about, you'll be talking for how long, Helen?
How long would you like me to talk?
35, 40 minutes, if that's okay. And then there's time for discussion after that. If people, oh, hello, Brendan, I haven't seen you until then. If you want to ask questions, the people here, after Helen has talked, you can either put your hand up electronically, or the chat function in Teams is very good, and you will be able to put questions in the sidebar, in the chat bar, if you click on the chat and contribute in that way as well. But if the chat isn't working for some reason, I can't see chat on my screen, then we can do that afterwards in the discussion time. Okay, Helen, over to you.
Okay, not sure how I sort of big up the screen. Is there a button? Because I'm not used to Teams.
Are you wanting to share a screen or just have your face?
Just my face.
Just your face. If Rafa, can you highlight? I'll see if I can.
One moment. Malka, please turn off your camera, and Brenda Komori, please turn off your. Oh, okay, Helen.
That's made it bigger. Sorry, I've managed to. It's called Spotlight. I've just discovered that button.
Okay.
Okay.
Right. Can you hear me okay? I can hear a bit of echo. I don't know what that's a bit better. Okay. Yeah, okay. Is that okay?
It is great.
Yes? All right. Right, fine. So to begin, so I wrote this this chapter for the handbook, as Julian mentioned, and it was a revisiting of work on silence in schooling, but it was to do with solitude. So it was a new venture, given that solitude and silence are different things, but obviously when you're talking about solitude in schooling, you're going to be in the domain of silence. And so everything is interconnected in these areas. And it was familiar territory for me, and it was not a grand departure from what I am used to dealing with in research terms in this domain. And then something happened which has really shifted my thinking on education, and this affects how I see silence, solitude, and loneliness, everything. So what has happened? I mean, I've been writing a book, and it's to do with universities, and it's to do with self-education in universities. And that book, the conversations that make up a large part of that book are what was the event, if you like, because I started to realize, I mean, the basis, the premise of that book is that we need to take care of ourselves. And I've always thought that. I mean, ever since I started in academia, I've thought, well, you know, the self is very interesting. What does that mean? And so that has led into the work on silence and self-care through silence, and self-care through forms of education which are non-violent or which are to do with autonomy, democratic voice. It's a huge package, if you like, of a way of dealing with children, dealing with being a human being in communities of others, that is fundamentally centered around the notion of self-care. But I had never really considered, well, what do I mean by self-care in any particular sort of fundamentally focalized way on caring for oneself. But I was starting to get into various therapeutic frameworks, which were really interesting because they were speaking the same language as alternative education, silence in schools, solitude in schools. But they didn't know anything about education. They were therapeutic frameworks, which are for people who are, largely speaking, we could say troubled with trauma, past trauma, childhood trauma, or various forms of trauma. And in adult lives, I mean, it doesn't have to be adults, it could be children as well. In lives, there's a search for a resolution, a solution to the difficulties that trauma can create in the body and in the mind. And so these therapeutic frameworks that I was coming across, one was the drama triangle, one was the inner child, and then I stumbled quite literally through Instagram on internal family systems. And these frameworks really impressed me. And the reason why they impressed me is because they resolve dilemmas. They resolve crisis points, anomalies in our thinking about things, which all of these research foci that I've had during my academic activity have been interested to resolve. So focusing on the notion of solitude specifically, if I apply these frameworks to the idea of solitude, suddenly, and this is the event, if you like, suddenly solitude is no longer solitude. It doesn't, solitude in the sense that I used to think about it doesn't exist anymore. Now, how does that happen? So to explain, what I need to do is introduce a little bit of internal family systems theory, framework, how they go about things. And I think, to be honest, I think in the context of wanting solitude, seeking solitude, valuing solitude, the ideas of internal family systems, not only are they fairly strange, frankly, despite their brilliance, but they're quite shocking because of how they flip the idea of silence, solitude, and so on. And that's where the lonely as a crowd thing comes in, because from at first glance, internal family systems look to us as though they are pointing to and talking about everybody being psychologically deranged or requiring a diagnosis. And let me just pause a moment, because first of all, given what I've been getting into in regard of internal family systems and other therapeutic frameworks to do with trauma, I no longer believe there's any such thing as a diagnosis. I certainly don't believe there's any such thing as deranged people. So a book that I've read recently is called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, who was the founder back in the 80s, I think, of internal family systems. And the key thesis of No Bad Parts, which is sort of, I think you might think of it as his breakthrough book, the important book, you know, and he might not be wrong, is that nobody, and this is also a framework that we find in alternative education, A.S. Neal and Summerhill, nobody is essentially a bad person. People do bad things, but his sort of challenge, or his offering, based on his activity as a therapist and the framework he's created, is that when people do bad things, or when people act in and of themselves in ways which might seem deranged, they might seem disturbed, they might seem wrong, it's not that the people are bad, it's that, and it's not even that they have part of them that is bad or badly behaved. Everyone has parts, okay? So this is where it starts to get into the realm of multiple personalities, and you think, oh, hang on a minute. And he also talks about internal beings or inner beings, and you're thinking, wait a minute, you know, the aliens have landed. No, it's not that. It's that we are all created and framed, or we are made up of many, many parts. And this connects up with the interest that I've been having in this idea of the inner child. So if you are dealing with yourself therapeutically, that idea is that we have, let's say, one inner us who might be a child of 6 or 8 or 12 or whatever, that at a certain point in our history got frozen in that state because of various forms of trauma, small and large, seen or unseen. And as adults, we are encountering the behaviors and the thinking as well of this inner child. And the therapeutic frame of inner child work is that you talk to the inner child. You connect with them, you contact them, you say, are you okay? Can I help you? Can I listen to you? And you literally start to have a relationship with a little mini inner you. Okay, so when you get to internal family systems, after you've dealt with that concept, the idea that there's multiple, I mean, up to 100 or more, who knows? I've only been dealing with internal family systems for, let's say, 4 or 5 months. And I certainly don't, I've never seen anything mentioning how many inner beings, how many multiple inner children we might have. But the point is that we have, from IFS, internal family systems perspective, is we have multiple parts who are not necessarily, and this is the freaky bit, but when you look at internal family systems and how they talk about this, it's a sort of a weird thing that you kind of have to run with, you have to accept, is that these parts of us are not us. That's where the sort of strange worry that we're talking about multiple personalities, you know, needing a diagnosis from some medical practitioner might come in, but it's not multiple personalities. Their claim, which, given how many people are involved and interested and value and respect internal family systems, that we are all made up of these many parts, many people, many inner beings, many children, because the parts are, largely speaking, children. They think like children, they're the age of children, they've had the experiences of children, then they got stopped because life is difficult and things happened. And so as adults, and of course, if we're talking about schooling, we might be talking about children and their children, their inner beings, their parts. None of those parts are bad. That's the first thing. Going back to my mentioning the No Bad Parts book by Richard Schwartz. None of those parts are bad, but they might be doing bad things. And the reason why they're doing bad things, and this is the lovely bit, is they're trying to protect what's called in IFS the exile. The exile is the part of us that was formed out of our integral whole, shall we say, that couldn't cope with something. that didn't have the resources, didn't have the support to cope with some form of trauma. And so part of us becomes exiled. And then in front of that exile are what they call protectors. And there's different types of protectors, managers, firefighters, and they do different roles. They behave in different ways according to need. But essentially they're protecting the vulnerable exile who is wounded. So in respect of solitude, and what is clear from getting interested in IFS is that essentially we all have these exiles, we all have these protectors. And when the protectors are behaving in a protective way, because they're children by nature, they're not necessarily rational. You can't kind of reason with them in the way that you would reason with an adult. And so they do silly stuff. They might behave in a what we would call sort of stupidly or wrongly even. But for them, the reason that they have is that they're doing a good job. They're trying to protect the exile. They're trying to protect the person of whom they are a part. So in the context of solitude, if this is true, I'm convinced, if this is true, then we're dealing with a situation of solitude where a person in solitude is not alone. They are not solitudinous as such. They're with their inner family, all of their parts, and in that respect, everyone together is alone in solitude. But in internal family systems, there is the concept of the self, which is the sort of the guiding, witnessing, good guy or girl. And internal family systems have these 8 C's. Let me see if I can remember them. The self is calm, connected, clear-headed, curious, courageous, confident. What's the other one? Well, you get the picture. They're good things. And so when we are not blended with a part, a protector or an exile, and suffering from that kind of difficulty, because these parts are children, we are our sort of purest form of all of those C words. And you could call it, I mean, I could refer in this respect to the ecstasy of Julian's work on being solitudinous, you know, where it feels good, or when you meditate or you're mindful and you're breathing in and out, the breathing is regulated, you're in a calm state, and you get a sense of things being kind of okay. There's no big trauma, trouble on the horizon. You can be. I don't know about people attending this seminar, but I have myself, I've touched what IFS call the self, most often as a result of some form of meditative practice. But what I have found as one person in the world is that touching the self is great, but being consistently and constantly with the self, which I think is what many religions talk about when they're talking about enlightened people, you know, they're just generally, you know, brilliantly calm or brilliantly rational or whatever you want to call it, they're special. And IFS, I think, when they're talking about self-leadership, they're pointing to someone, a person who is not blended or not having difficulty in their lifetime with parts, behaving like children, which is our general experience as far as I can tell. We are mostly dealing with the behavior of these parts. Solitude as a form of silence, a form of calm, can allow us to access the self more than being triggered by people in a crowd. But nevertheless, when we're moving into solitude away from being with other people, a community of others, we might be avoiding the triggering of other people, but that doesn't mean that those parts have gone. They never go, apparently. They're with us all the time. And so the work of IFS, the requirement is not to ignore the parts. Apparently they backlash terribly if you do something like that. It's not to ignore them or to pretend that they're not there or to kind of not believe in them. It's to, therapeutically, it's to work with them in a compassionate, caring way, in the same sense that with this framework of the inner child, you would work with yourself, whether you believe it's a small child or it's just, you know, you as an adult or whatever. You work with these parts in this compassionate way, not so that they disappear, because they're you, they're part of you, they're your family, your inner family, but in order to have everyone in harmony. So earlier when Julian was introducing me, he was talking about finding peace in families. Well, the way to find peace in families, if we're combining these frameworks, it's not to have peaceful families, that's external family work. It's to have peace within your own internal family, so that whatever your family does, you can be led by yourself with a capital S, rather than led by a part, because otherwise what you have is it could be adults or it could be children, adults and adults together, or children and adults together, or children and children together, and they're all, it's parts talking to each other. And so IFS is saying that the way for the calm, these C's, calm, connectedness, clarity, confidence, etc., etc., for those to be in play in any given interaction, and that includes the interaction with yourself, whether you're with others or not, is for the parts to stop triggering each other, for conversations across people or with people to not be conversations between parts, but rather that if a part is in operation on the part of one person, that the best thing is that someone somewhere is led by the self, because they can witness the sorrow, the pain, the protective good intentions of the part of the other person. And they are, therefore, this is a sort of the transaction analysis, games people play, scripts and all that kind of domain. They are not going to be acting up or reacting. It's going to be much more of a calm dynamic where we can attend to others and their parts and the way that those parts are behaving, but we can also, and this is, I suppose, the key thing in respect of solitude, we can attend to ourselves. So in that sense, solitude has disappeared because it's not about moving away from people in order to be calm or to get a break or to be happy. It's about dealing therapeutically with many voices, many beings, many elements of ourselves, so that whether we are in a crowd or whether we are by ourselves, we can have some peace. Because solitude as a concept needs to take account of the notion that when we are by ourselves, we may not be behaving very well with ourselves. So that's the key move that I wanted to introduce. There's quite a lot to take in about internal family systems, I think. So I've been watching it, if you like, maybe with a researcher perspective. I'm also personally very interested to see, well, you know, what is this? And as far as I can tell, this is a highly successful, highly transformative, and also of great interest, I think, quick manner in which people can be calm whether they are in a crowd or they are by themselves. And this, of course, makes the very notion of solitude, the very experience of solitude, a better experience. I don't think that there's that much attention on how hard, well, maybe there is, and I'm sure you'll tell me, on how hard it is to be self-led, as IFS talks about it, when you are in solitude. I mean, you know, if we look at religions and how they talk about the difficulty of being a hermit, the difficulty of being in a silent retreat, it's not easy, you know, because those frameworks would talk about rumination or a lack of ability to be quiet, shut up, you know, for the beneficial riches that can bring if you could just stick with it. It's about switching paradigms from the world of the other, the world where conversations occur and dialogue is the means by which you are and you be and you are seen and you have an identity, to another state, another experience of being and of the world where language and dialogue is not a part of it. And that's a very different experience. As I'm sure we know, I mean, we're all interested in this area, so we know that there's something going on when we switch to this other domain, which is fundamentally rich and useful educationally, of course, but also personally. And so my curiosity, that's the other one. If I didn't say it, that's one of the C's. I think I might have. My curiosity is to do with the spoiling of the idea of solitude by the possibility that we could be made up of parts who never disappear, but also a question mark over what parts might be such that they don't spoil solitude, that they are our friends, they are ourselves, they are our children. And if we could only muster up enough compassion to welcome them, to talk to them, to integrate them, such that they no longer, apparently parts remain, but I'll say this, and I'm not sure what the future of this phrase would be, but such that they no longer are experienced as parts, that they become integrated into the self. So it's just, it's sort of, it's not spoiled the concept of solitude for me. It's made me realize that we've been thinking about it in a certain way because it's a beautiful thing and we like it and it makes us feel good and we see the benefits through research, through personal experience, personal practice, professional practice. We know that these things are good, but the key issue is that we can't stop there. There's a need, and I think especially now in the world and the way that we need to move forward with the world in order to not only save it, but to, well, increase something that's good rather than go in the other direction. The need is to accept a requirement to use our solitude, to use our silence as well as we can in a therapeutic manner that may involve accepting that something is ruining our silence and ruining our solitude, such that we undo all of these precious things and we're prepared to, for a moment or for the period that therapeutic work would require of us, to say, okay, I'm going to dialogue with these parts. I'm going to dialogue with myself. For a while, I will not be alone as I thought I could be, because I really want to be silent. I really want to be in solitude in a way which has quality and which is not spoiled by me. I'm open to questions. I mean,
Helen, once before we were at a conference on silence in education, and you started your talk with silence, and people kept interrupting you to say, no, you can talk now. And you had to say, no, I am being silent, because so I didn't know if your silence then was your demonstration silence. Do you remember that conference? I do,
I remember that very well. It was really funny.
Philosophy of education. You just couldn't be silent without telling people to be quiet because you want to be silent, whilst they were telling you you could talk. That's fascinating. Sorry, your talk was fascinating, not just the silence. I see the chat doesn't seem to be working for us, so I think if people wish to ask, I'm sure people want to ask questions. I want to ask questions, but I'll push myself back for once in my life. If people want to ask questions or make comments or ask how this illuminates or could illuminate work in solitude studies more generally in other fields, could you put your electronic hands up? There's a little face with a hand next to it where you can do a reaction, a smiley face or whatever, or simply put your hand up. I'll do it myself just to show if people haven't got that. So it comes up with a yellow hand. I'll put mine down now. And I'm hoping I'll be able to see hands up, and I'm busking now, Helen. I'll invite you to talk. We've got 20 people here. Jill, would you like to unmute yourself? There you are.
Hello, thank you, Helen. That's actually really fascinating. What I was just sitting wondering about as you were talking is, how do you identify that real self? When you talk about this multitude of selves that we all have, how do you know which the real self is? If that real self is going to dialogue with other parts of you, how do you ascertain that?
Well, I mean, I could talk from various frameworks, and because also when I started getting interested in IFS, I would mention it to people, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, you know, there are other therapeutic frameworks or other frameworks that talk like that or talk about that." I think the major contribution of IFS is to say that there are no bad parts, and I mean they're talking about, you know, people like. People who, say for instance, somebody who's murdered someone, they would identify that that act was done by a part that was trying to protect that person. Obviously, you know, it's a terrible tragedy and things have gone wrong and so on and so forth. But the key claim there is that the part that did the murder didn't intend to hurt anybody, but they did what they did in order to protect the exile of the murderer. So what that allows us to do is to see the murderer as not a bad person, but as someone who's got a part that's behaving in a very extreme way and causing a lot of difficulty and trouble for people. Okay, and so that gives us a general sense of everybody, all of us, as essentially good. And in alternative education, that is the fundamental premise of allowing children to have autonomy and democratic voice. So IFS has its framework for considering what is the self, how do we access the self, and how do we recognize the self, right? But other frames have their own way to say what is the self. So I'm familiar with Vedantic Hindu philosophy about accessing Brahman, which is the idea of the self, or the God, the idea of God, and their pathway, if you like, is to meditate and do yoga, various forms of yoga. There are many different types. So their pathway is this sort of yogic practice and meditation, with a view, with an aim to realizing the self. And it's fascinating that IFS, which is not a religion, although, you know, they probably have to be careful to kind of not become one, but it's very firmly, I think, a therapeutic framework. IFS gives a really easy way to conceptualize the self, which, contrasting with this sort of long, intense, very sacred, profound journey of Vedantic philosophy, is kind of, what would be the word? I don't know, just very neighborly. It's very kind of next door. You can do it, I can do it. How do we do it? The process is very kind of quick in regards to getting the parts who are stopping us accessing or being this self who is calm, confident, courageous, curious, connected, clear, etc. I'm sure that other one that I'm missing, it's a great thing, whatever it is. We can get closer to this way of dealing with things this way of being, the self, by attending to the parts that are stopping us being connected to. So the idea is that the self is always there, but we can't see it and we can't be it because the parts are acting up. And so if we deal with the parts, it's not that we get them out of the way or we throw them away or we do them in and move on. It's much more that they feel happy, contented, safe with us, so that we can be more self-led, right? So it's not that, you know, it's not either or. It's more about a question of degrees. So the more parts that are stopping us accessing the self, the more therapeutic work that we have to do with a variety of parts. But the thing that I've seen, and also personally experienced myself, is that when you do this process of asking the protectors of whatever kind that they are, firefighters, managers, asking them, could I please speak to the exile? Can I chat to you? Can I chat to the parts? Please, protectors, could you move aside so I can get to the hurt part of me? Once you, the framework of IFS is that once you get to the exile, you hear their story, you hear why they're upset, and they can unburden themselves, which my own personal experience is if you're accessing an exile, they do a bit of crying, right? You know, they cry it all out. And then the process is that you say to the exile, right, you know, so sorry that's happened to you and everything. Let's thank the protectors for all the hard work they've done trying to protect you, brackets, even if it was really bad practice from our point of view. But let's thank them and let's get that exile out of exile. Let's move that exile into a better place. And I've seen Richard Schwartz on YouTube, whatever, when he's doing these kind of conference talks and so on, and he's practicing IFS in front of an audience, and he'll access an exile of the person he's speaking to, and then he'll say to that person or the exile, he'll say, and where would you like to go now? And one that I saw, they said, I'd like to go to the beach. And his comment was, yes, that's quite common. You know, so once that exile has had a chance to unburden themselves of their sad emotions, then you give them an opportunity to go and live in a better place, a nicer a nicer environment, which is what you would do with a child. If you found a child who was, I'll just get some water. If you found a child who was in a basement room, a dark basement room, with no food and water, no toys, and neglected, if you saw them, you know, you deal with them therapeutically, and then you say, where would you like to go? And they'd probably say, I'd like to have a nice bedroom with a nice bed and a fluffy duvet and some toys and cuddly toys and, you know, a bit of light through the window and so on. It's a much better environment. So it's the same idea that you're doing with these exiles, is you're repositioning them in your system in a happier environment. And then the outcome of these processes is that you feel more self-led, you feel calmer, you are able to be more connected, curiosity is enabled to flourish and flow, you feel more confident, and having done a number of these exercises myself, I've been astonished by the impact that it's had on me. So I encountered IFS, well, 4 or 5 months ago, and I've given it a go. You know, I've joined in to see what it might do, and well, it's transformed me personally. And I mean, I haven't really been doing it very hard, or, you know, I don't have an IFS therapist. I got a book which they call IFS Self Therapy by J. Early, which everybody was talking about as really good. And I gave some of the exercises a go, but I think I've only got to page like 15 or 20. You know, I'm not a seasoned practitioner by any account, but what I have noticed is a transformation of who I am from somebody who was burdened by parts, who was dealing with some dysfunctional part behavior, and it's all gone. It's not all gone, and I've still got work to do, as we all have, but it has gone in to an extent that I am super impressed and super astonished. And so I think that this this IFS framework is very important. And part of its importance, as far as I can tell from having encountered all these other frameworks that offer you access to the self, is its speed. It's really effective.
So it feels a bit like a shortcut in a sense. Thank you, Helen. I've lots of questions, but I'm really aware that somebody else has got their hand up, Julian. So
yeah, thank you. And sorry, I'm going to put my hand up now, and I see Piotr is waiting to ask, and I'll ask you next, Piotr. Helen, I'm fascinated. Sorry, the bells are accompanying me. I'm fascinated by how you describe it, and I've read of Gestalt theory, which has a similar alienated parts of the self that we encounter in dreams and trauma and so on. There's a long history of solitude being the place where you meet other people who are not there. So you go to a graveyard to think about dead people, or you climb a mountain to think about your former lover, or you, and so on. So solitude, as well as for meeting oneself or parts of oneself or exiled parts of oneself, I'm wondering if there is a stage of, not only is it a place to meet parts of oneself, it is also a place to meet other people who are not there, including, I suppose, fictional people as well, and for many sacred and divine beings. So is IFS, as it were, shutting the door to other encounters, other forms of dialogue or encounter, not shutting the door, but not opening the door to encounters in solitude with others? How would you think with that view of solitude?
Yeah, I think that what they is, I've no idea. I think IFS as an idea, as a framework, would probably, from what I can gather so far, would suggest that when, so you, the book that you've read, the person that you knew that died, the person that you knew that rejected you and ran away for someone else, the film that you saw that made such an impact on you, whatever it is that you might go up the mountain to reflect upon, or whoever it is that you might feel is themselves a sort of a part to dwell on, you know, an entity to dwell on in solitude. I think IFS would say that these impressions and experiences, people or whatever it might be, they have become a part of us, in the sense that a part of us has connected to them, remembers them well, loves them, enjoyed them, and that part of us does not want to forget them. And so to be in solitude would be to dwell with that part, because one of the key things, I've spoken significantly about dysfunctionality from our point of view of part behavior, but there seems to be also a very valid focus in IFS on parts that are behaving well and are doing good work that we don't see as dysfunctional. You know, all parts are equal, no part is bad, but from our adult perspective, some parts could do us a favor and do other things. Yeah. And actually, just to mention that, when this work of unburdening the parts is done, IFS talks about how these parts are then asked or volunteer or do other work. And they say, so for instance, if a part was kind of like a part of you is really untidy and you don't know why there's this compulsion to be untidy, so you deal with that untidy part of you, you unburden it, you help it out, you connect with it, you give it compassion, and then you say, is there something you'd like to do other than being untidy? I mean, this is a little bit of a frivolous example, but nevertheless, it's a valid one, because apparently that part of you that used to be untidy and now doesn't feel sad and expresses untidy as a protective measure, it then chooses other work. So I'm not sure exactly what how we would talk about the part of us that is not us that has become a part of us, but certainly there's no door closing.
Yeah, okay, no, that's really interesting. I think it's and it fits also with some of those Vedantic ideas that what you get through contemplation is not just, you don't just reach yourself, you reach the entire universe. But it also fits with a solipsistic and perhaps dangerous. So the nature of self is not pinned down to just an individualistic self. It could be the whole universe, if you see what I mean.
I think that's encompassed in the connected C.
Sorry, that. Thank you. I butted in there, but Piotr has a question. Piotr, would you like to unmute yourself? And Piotr Domoraci, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Julian, for sharing to me my voice. Thank you very much for a wonderful lecture. I regret to admit at once that I'm not an educator but just a philosopher. And from this perspective, because it's the only one cognitively available to me, I can relate to what was presented. So please do not mind if what I say seems to you naive or misguided. All the more reason to comment. Do I understand correctly that the inner image of the family can help us to better understand the other person? How do we understand this context, the situation of a person who has internalized a model of family, being a person who has experienced in the past what Franz Rupert calls symbiotic trauma? This researcher argues that the family is the source and the transmitter of symbiotic trauma, which is a significant predictor of many types of social maladjustment, ultimately contributing to the entry by individuals marked by this trauma into disturbed relationships, which usually result in the emergence of loneliness in these individuals or in their partners. I would be grateful for your response, and thank you for it already in advance.
So, for instance, an entrance into loneliness, which you posited as the outcome of these forms of trauma which occurred from the external family, as I understand you, which end up with somebody being lonely or solitudinous, but not necessarily in a positive chosen sense. It's more a sort of withdrawal because they can't cope, or they're dealing with feelings which are sort of not shareable on account of their difficult nature, right? So loneliness as a traumatic withdrawal, if I understand you rightly. IFS, I believe, would consistently say that this is a protective measure. So the person who is lonely in that sense is protecting themselves by being lonely, or rather there's a part of them which is lonely, which is alone, and these parts kind of form, as far as I can tell, they form teams. So there might be one part which is asocial, one part which is lonely, one part which feels hatred towards mankind, womankind. There might be a big team of parts, but their main endeavor, their main purpose in teaming up like this is to protect the person, which in the case of somebody who's had external family-based traumas, somebody's going to be sad, right? There are going to be lots of exiles that are needing help in order to find a way out and to access the self. So it's a package, but the idea of that package is that, well, the wonderful thing about that package is that there's an exit plan. So even if somebody has been incredibly traumatized by their external family experiences, and even to the point where they have internalized members of their family as parts who are acting within their system, they can work through this framework to unburden the sadness and the trauma and return to their self, which IFS claims, and so do many religions, is untarnishable by any form of difficulty. It remains always the same connected, calm, courageous, etc., etc. entity.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you. It's fascinating. You talk about the ease. If anyone else has a question, comment. You talk, Helen, of the relative easiness with which this approach seems to give one in recovering or in dealing with things. Is the politics and the communal morality and so on, how does it fit? Is it a thing? People say of Freud that it works very well for Middle European, middle class people, you know, the Viennese of Freud's era, and it doesn't fit so well with other cultural systems, other approaches to relationship, to community, to what it means to be oneself. In oneself, or in family, or in community. Is it a system that has what we might call cultural critics of it as a suitable in this circumstance but not that, suitable for these people but not those people? Do you know of ways of I don't mean just negatively, but ways of understanding as culturally placed and therefore appropriate for many people, but not for these people, whether it's about how one thinks about oneself, how one thinks about other people as opposed to one's own other people. Yeah. How linguistically narrow is it? Does it work very well in English but not in other languages? And
well, so, as with silence, so silence is a wonderful material, as I've said in the past, and as many people would agree with me, because it crosses boundaries of languages, national culture. It is equal to all, accessible to all. And IFS operates in a sort of similar way. Criticisms of the IFS model, as far as I can tell so far, and I have been looking for criticisms because I don't want to get involved in any kind of cult sect mentality. And when I see that somebody or a group of people are extremely enthusiastic about something, as I encountered with home education, you know, it was all good news. You have to wait a long time to really know and get deep down into a more complex, nuanced picture of everything involved in something, which seems to be great. Okay, so one of the things that I have identified with IFS, and I can assure you I'm looking actively for any possible ways to criticize it, is that to have an IFS therapist is really expensive. Okay, but they seem to have kind of worked that one out, and they don't like it as a dynamic in respect of disabling other people who don't have much money from accessing it. And there's a very active Facebook group. There are these free groups that you can join up and stuff. You know, I've kind of joined them all just to see what's going on. And this book that I mentioned by Jay Early, which is the self-therapy, IFS lends itself as a model. And this is why I'm very interested in it, because I think that everybody should have the benefit of some form of therapeutic help, even if it's just learning about frameworks that they can use themselves. And IFS is very easy and effective to use by yourself. Okay, so it's not expensive. Inherently, you can go expensive with it, but you don't have to. You can get benefit from it without spending a penny, other than maybe your broadband service, because it's all over the internet. And I found that the No Bad Parts book is an interesting read. And what's that, 20 pounds maybe? I can't remember how much it cost, 20 euros. So that's one area of criticism. And then so going back to this comment about silence as accessible to all, the function of IFS and how it works with others, if you were engaging with some therapeutic help or in a group, they're quite big on people getting together and doing something called peer witnessing, which I started to get into, but I didn't have time. But certainly it looks interesting that other people witness your parts speaking and you witness theirs speaking, and you just attend. You know, it's just a kind of a sharing and a being present too, so that parts can get heard. Okay, but the core functionality of the framework and the way that it has success, and a very fast-paced, effective success, is open to everybody, independent of economic status, race, gender, nationality, and language. Because even if someone can't speak, right, even if somebody actually doesn't have the power of language, they can internally, one assumes, they can internally dialogue with themselves. And the function that is important in IFS is that you can ask your parts, and Richard Schwartz suggests that parts do speak up if you're polite enough and compassionate enough. You can ask them to tell you what's wrong, and they do. This is the astonishing thing. The parts don't, well, so for instance, let's say you attempt to access a part who's behaving in a certain way. You say, "Hi, part, could you tell me why you're doing that? You know, I've tried this, okay? Could you tell me why you're doing that?" And you get a big fat silence in reply. That's a silent part who is blocking that part from speaking to you. Or it's that part itself doesn't trust you enough to tell you. But if you can work therapeutically with that part to gain its trust, to reassure it and assure it that it would be safe to speak to you and tell you, or it would be safe to move aside so you can access the exile behind, then you're onto a winner. So you've got this work that you need to do, but you're kind of guaranteed, I guess, because these parts are you, you know, they're not going anywhere. As long as you can manage the right relationship, you're going to start a dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. Jill Simpson, you still have your hand up. Is that because you'd like to ask another question? And you're more than welcome.
No, I'm sorry, I just haven't put my hand down, sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Nice to see your hand. I've been reading about Frieda from Reichmann, who's one of the few therapists, psychiatrists, psychoanalysts who write about loneliness. And she says of herself, and others say of her, she's one of the few people in that field, and it's a linked field across psychiatry, psychoanalyst, therapy, one of the few people who has no theory. And she says, "I have no theory, I just sit and wait." All the people she works with, she says, all mental health difficulties are forms of loneliness. She just waits with them. She is present with them, as you said. She is in presence with them. And that's it. That is her non-theory. And she says particularly of male psychoanalysts and psychiatrists and therapists, they always like a good theory and they like to impose it on the people they are treating, and they jump in too quickly and they don't wait. Her special skill was waiting, including waiting in silence. And I'm interested that you're, in a way that I wouldn't expect you to say of schools, you're particularly impressed by the speed, by it being so quick. And I didn't expect you to say that, because I'm used to you waiting patiently and to being educationally a fan of waiting in the Frieda from Reichmann sense.
Yeah, but then that is fascinating. Thank you for mentioning that, because it fits entirely and perfectly with the idea, and of course this is an educational idea as well, that we need voice. And this is just an extension of the idea that we need voice. It's not just us, a unitary person who needs voice. It's not the idea that we have a traumatized inner child that we need to attend to who needs voice. It's the idea that we have parts who need voice. And the great thing, I guess, and we see this in education, is that when you give voice, and it would be the psychotherapist that you're talking about gives voice by not interrupting and not imposing a framework. In the silence, voice is given. In the pausing and the waiting, voice is given. That us as people, if we see ourselves as unitary, children in a classroom, or us as full of parts, there is this impetus, this force, this, I would go so far as to say, this biological element of growth. You know, just like plants grow and they kind of can't help that they shoot out leaves and grow flowers or fruit and so on. We also have the same impulse to express ourselves. And that really is potentially the energy line that runs through IFS, which makes it so fast and so effective. The idea that all we need, and this of course is connected to solitude, and I do want to make that connection because this is a seminar on solitude, is that all we need is a platform for voice. And solitude, I think, is a brilliant platform for voice when we're dealing with internal family systems, internal beings who require the space, the silence, the lack of kind of hassle and trouble from the outside to find a way to emerge and speak with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Helen. Do we have any other? We might have time for one more question, although it's not compulsory to voice, as it were. I know I've said this many times before, an average teacher's gap after asking a question before moving on is something like half a second. So I'm trying to give a bit more silence after I say, are there any other comments, questions?
I mean, one thing that whilst, you know, I know I'm filling the pause, but I am really aware that this is kind of a little bit mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to me, at least. It's mind-blowing to me that there is such an easy way to deal with what we assume is a lifelong problem of an imperfect person who is maybe acceptable in some ways and not acceptable in others. This is a framework which just turns the idea that you like someone or not like someone and all of these things on their head. It's not that we like that person or we don't like that person. It's that we like that part of a person or we don't like that part of a person, which means that everyone is equal, liked part or not liked part. We're all okay, we're all acceptable. We just have parts that we might need to deal with, which are kind of causing interrelational difficulty. And so suddenly community rises as a much stronger concept.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I'll be thinking about that, as you say. Thank you, Helen. I don't see other questions now. I think my mind is at least half blown by that. I'm delighted to hear about that and to hear such a, I think often we say we need solitude or whatever, as though you put that in a box and have it, rather than helping people understand how they can use it, what they can do, what it's not for, but what one does. And I think a lot of people are in need of support in knowing what their solitude is about, what they can do, people who want constant external stimulation. And so we have a new way of looking, or I have now a new way of looking at that, and you have, Helen, and others. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to be with you. Thank you, everybody, for taking part, for listening. We will be putting the recording, has the recording finished? No, the recording's still going on. We'll be putting a recording of this up on the website, so people who are not able to be here, and I know several people who have sent apologies already before the event, who are not able to be here can do that. And I know, Helen, that you would be happy corresponding with people if they're interested in that. If people wish to contact the ISRS, there is on the website, there is a generic email address that Rafa and can catch up on and could forward correspondence to you, Helen, and so on. And I'm sure you'd be interested in that. So thank you very much. And I can, oh yeah, I can do a electronic